On this Friday night, federal cash for crippled oil companies.
Our goal is to create immediate jobs.
How much help is coming and why this isn't a bailout. BC's goal to crush the curve, the new optimism, and how soon restrictions could be relaxed. Attention, all passengers. The new rule on the way for all travelers.
And we have liftoff.
And the space odyssey that went awry.
We knew we were in deep trouble.
The 50th anniversary of Apollo 13's near disaster.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. Canada's hard-hit oil and gas sector is getting a badly needed boost, one that will help companies and workers. There have been repeated requests for aid because of COVID-19 and a huge dip in global oil prices. Now, the federal government is spending $1.7 billion to clean up abandoned oil wells in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and BC. Ottawa is also creating a $750 million fund to cut methane emissions. There's also help for businesses, $962 million, to help those who don't have access to traditional financial institutions. The Liberals say the aid will save about 10,000 jobs across the country.
Our goal is to create immediate jobs in these provinces while helping companies avoid bankruptcy and supporting our environmental targets.
But will it be enough to get the economy back on track? Abigail Bimman has our top story tonight.
Punched twice by record low oil prices and COVID-19, Alberta has been waiting weeks for help for the oil and gas industry. Now they have some.
We've also heard very clearly, and not just from industry, but from municipalities, particularly rural municipalities, landowners across Alberta, that the issue of persistent orphan or inactive wells is a real challenge.
$1.7 billion to clean up orphaned wells, not just in Alberta, but also Saskatchewan and British Columbia. And $750 million for an emission reduction fund that focuses on methane, 10% of it earmarked for Newfoundland and Labrador.
So this is, really important for small to medium-sized businesses. I think there's a perception that the industry is dominated by massive capital projects, big oil rigs, miles of pipeline, and in fact, it's dominated by small to medium-sized businesses.
One of them, Peyto Exploration and Development.
Disappointing. Woefully inadequate would be terms that I would use to describe what they're offering to the industry, particularly considering what the industry is going through right now.
Many hoping for a bigger oil bailout.
What the industry, I think, was really looking for was a package of liquidity to help bridge the time between now, as we face these really low prices, and when all of us as consumers around the world start to get back out and drive and fly, and demand for oil goes back up.
Cleaning things up while getting back to work is in line with the Trudeau government's political goals. You know their old refrain, the economy and the environment go hand in hand.
Just because we're in a health crisis doesn't mean we can neglect the environmental crisis.
Alberta's premier says today's help is critical and immediately tweeted his thanks. But Jason Kenney is clear more needs to be done.
I want to once again reiterate the urgency of the national government stepping up to ensure liquidity.
This was the first announcement about help for the oil and gas industry, but a government source says it won't be the last. This will be a multi-step approach, like so many of the financial help announcements have been these past weeks. Abigail Bimman, Global News, Ottawa.
Our David Akin joins us now. David, the funding certainly helps, but will it go far enough?
Well, Westerners tell me it's a start, but more is going to need to be done. The big deal here is that these two federal agencies, Business Development Canada and Export Development Canada, they're going to get involved helping mid-size energy firms who right now have a liquidity crisis. They can't get credit from their banks, can't borrow. Now, if the BDC and the EDC do their jobs right, that could mean billions for the sector, and it could save a lot of firms from going bankrupt, Robin.
All right, what about politics? How much is that a factor in all of this?
Well, a fair bit. But you know what? It's not the Jason Kenney versus Justin Trudeau kind of politics. It's really internal Liberal politics. There's a whole lot of Liberal MPs and some Liberal cabinet ministers, Heritage Minister Stephen Guilbeault, for example, who are dead set against the idea of a federal bailout of the oil and gas sector. So the political problem for the Prime Minister is design a package to address the liquidity crisis for a range of sectors, say manufacturing, tourism, airlines, and, oh, by the way, the oil and gas sector. In the meantime, the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers is asking the federal government to temporarily relieve oil producers of what they call some low-risk regulatory requirements, things like pollution monitoring or testing water quality. Now, environmentalists say this is just the oil lobby trying to get out from underneath regulatory requirements that it has long complained about and just using the COVID-19 crisis as the excuse. Robin?
David Akin in Ottawa. Thanks, David. Trudeau also announced $500 million in support for Canada's arts, culture and sports sectors, which have been hit particularly hard by the pandemic. There are some glimmers of hope in Canada's fight against COVID-19. Dr. Theresa Tam says there are signs the virus is slowing in parts of the country, but that progress could easily be lost if Canadians stop physical distancing.
New outbreaks can be sparked anywhere at any time. So remember, this is not a sprint, it is a marathon, and there will only be unpleasant surprises if we quit early.
More than 1,300 people in Canada have died of COVID-19, and the number of confirmed cases has now surpassed 31,000. Ontario recorded its most new cases in a single day. 564 more people have tested positive. Quebec also reported a spike, 941 new confirmed cases. Alberta has 239 new ones, and BC has only 43 new cases. And if that trend continues, BC officials say they could start easing restrictions in mid-May. Eric Sorensen looks at what BC is getting right and how other provinces compare.
It is, on balance, good news for BC. The upward curve in the number of COVID-19 cases is flattening, and the requirement for ICUs and ventilators is well within BC's capacity to handle the outbreak so far. Modeled against other jurisdictions, the number of cases in northern Italy and in Hubei, China, BC, the purple line, is by comparison much lower day by day, and not very different from the much admired outcome so far in South Korea.
So we are on the right track, but we must hold that line.
BC's data shows something striking about the age groups with the virus. The number of COVID-19 cases has mostly struck working-age adults in their 30s to their 60s. But the number of deaths has taken a terrible toll on older people. In fact, the median age of people who've died is 86 in British Columbia.
This again reflects the tragedy that has been the outbreaks that we've had in our long-term care homes here in British Columbia.
And it reflects the rise in mortality among the elderly across the country.
The regional disparity we saw in the wave of cases we're now seeing in the number of deaths. With the smaller provinces, the numbers remain very low. On the prairies, the East Coast, the Northern Territories, barely 1% of the total deaths in the country. Now, in the bigger provinces, BC and Alberta have seen a drop-off in their numbers. It is a much bigger number in Ontario and a disturbingly high number in Quebec. And this represents 98% of all the deaths in Canada. But here is the trend. Over the last week, Ontario and Quebec together account for 94% of the deaths in the country. All the other provinces and territories, just 6%. And the sad fact is, Quebec has recorded almost 62% of all the deaths in Canada in the last week.
The tragedy in Quebec has played out largely in long-term care facilities, and the province is struggling to get on top of it.
We're going through a tough situation, but we're doing everything we can to take care of our elderly.
A surge in COVID-19 deaths was expected this month. It is hitting harder in central Canada, but the advice to all of Canada is don't let up. Keep your distance.
We have come through this together, but we're not out of it yet. We're still in the eye of that storm.
Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
A personal support worker at a Toronto long-term care home has died from COVID-19. 54-year-old Christine Mandagarian passed away Wednesday. She worked in healthcare for more than 3 decades, most recently at Sienna Altamont Care Community. Her husband believes more should have been done to protect them and his wife.
I'm not upset, I'm mad. After what my wife worked 31 years in that place, and that's how they treat my wife. She gave a life over there. She gave a life for the senior citizens over there.
There are more than 40 confirmed cases of COVID-19 at the Toronto facility. At least 8 residents have died from the virus. The federal government is sending reinforcements into Quebec to help long-term care homes hit by outbreaks. 125 military medical personnel will be deployed starting this weekend. At least 688 people in Quebec have died of COVID-19. More than half were in long-term care homes. In many cases, those facilities are understaffed and workers are poorly paid. Quebec's premier admitted today that staffing problems played a role in the crisis. He said in French that he should have acted faster.
If I were to do it again, I would have increased the wages of orderlies more quickly. I take full responsibility for this. We came into this crisis badly equipped. And of course, the situation has deteriorated.
The deaths of Canadians at care homes are raising fears about how many seniors could contract COVID-19. Europe has seen a rapid surge and similar tragedies in these facilities. Only now are governments there changing how they deal with these vulnerable residents and staff. Here's Redmond Shannon.
3 weeks ago, as Spain's death rate was rising rapidly, soldiers found dead bodies abandoned inside a Madrid nursing home. Staff had apparently been overwhelmed. The virus swept through Italian care homes just as quickly. Most countries had restricted or banned outside visitors, but in many cases, hospital patients were admitted into care homes without testing. The UK is now changing that in a similar move to provinces like Ontario.
Today we can announce that everybody going from hospital into social care will be tested, will be isolated whilst the result of that test comes through.
Staff and residents with symptoms will be tested too. It should help reduce infections, but it might also impact the UK's death numbers, which only includes those who died inside hospitals.
I think it's been widely reported that there are growing numbers of deaths within care homes, and we're very anxious that we get those properly and accurately recorded so that we can ensure that we understand how to manage this pandemic.
This week it emerged the UK death toll figure, including care homes, is at least 15% higher than government tallies. Belgium's very high national death rate could be down to it including suspected and untested cases of COVID-19 in care facilities. Like Canada, almost half of its deaths could be in seniors' homes, suggesting the UK and others could still be underestimating deaths. Italy only started testing in care homes last week. Britain, meanwhile, is putting in place protocols for families to visit dying relatives.
Giving people's closest loved ones the chance to say goodbye.
Helping, if nothing else, to make the most difficult moments a little easier. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Air travelers are facing a new rule. Coming up, what else you need to bring to the airport. If you plan on catching a flight anytime soon, you'll want to pack a mask. Starting Monday, all air passengers in Canada need to have a non-medical mask to cover their mouth and nose during travel. You'll be required to prove you have it during the boarding process. Otherwise, you won't be allowed on the plane. People traveling on ferries are also being encouraged to wear non-medical masks whenever possible. In the U.S., plans to reopen businesses and restart the economy are going nowhere fast. Officials in many states say they don't have the testing ability needed to let people get back to regular life. And as Jackson Proskow explains, that caused President Donald Trump to lash out.
For all the talk of reopening the U.S. economy, most of America is nowhere close to ready. In South Dakota, more than 600 workers at a meat processing plant have COVID-19. The plant, which handles 5% of U.S. pork, is closed indefinitely. New York has seen more than 600 fatalities in the last day.
We're recommending certain things. They'll be in place dependent on what the governor wants to do.
Thursday, President Donald Trump revealed guidelines for how the states should lift stay-at-home orders, slowly over time. By Friday, he was lashing out at governors over Twitter, demanding they open up immediately.
He's doing nothing. He said it's up to the states. It's up to the governors, which is what it always was.
Governors and the experts agree the U.S. has fallen short when it comes to COVID-19 testing, warning that makes it impossible to return to regular life.
You do need testing because we need to know what actually is happening in our communities.
The materials needed to conduct the tests remain in short supply. The governors want a national strategy, but Trump has told states to do it by themselves, just days after claiming he himself has absolute authority.
I think the president doesn't want to believe that testing is a problem. And it is a problem, particularly if we want to get the country going again.
Amidst all the back and forth, Americans keep getting sick. The nation's capital, Washington, is quickly emerging as a new hotspot. School has been canceled for the rest of the year. Just as in New York, officials are turning convention centers into field hospitals.
Tonight, as the U.S. approaches 700,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19, some local officials are in fact opening things up. In Texas, they're going to allow all retailers to open up to serve customers on a to-go basis. Minnesota is opening golf courses. And in Florida, in Jacksonville, they've opened the beaches, and tonight they're already packed. Robin?
Jackson, Proskow in Washington. President Trump's former lawyer is set to be released from jail early because of the pandemic. Michael Cohen will serve the rest of his 3-year sentence at home. He pleaded guilty to several charges, including campaign finance fraud and lying to Congress. White helmets, white nights. Still ahead, how a group of Syrians plans to protect refugees from COVID-19. China has dramatically raised its death toll in Wuhan, where the new coronavirus was first detected. The number shot up 50%, from 1,290 to 3,869. Officials, facing claims of a cover-up, are blaming incorrect reporting and delays. It's the first time China is publicly admitting fatalities were omitted, including those who died at home. A new United Nations report is sounding the alarm about the devastation COVID-19 could cause in Africa. It shows 300,000 people could die from the virus this year, even under the best-case scenario. With no interventions, Africa could see more than 3 million deaths and over 1 billion people infected with COVID-19. The UN says poverty, crowded urban areas, and widespread health problems make Africa particularly susceptible to the virus. So far, there are more than 18,000 confirmed cases and at least 970 deaths, but the continent is weeks behind Europe in the pandemic. Syria's humanitarian rescue group, the White Helmets, is disinfecting camps where people fleeing conflict are being forced to live with little supplies. In a series of tweets, the White Helmet says its volunteers have started a sterilization program to reach as many internationally displaced residents as it can, with the focus being on virus defense and education. A large number of hospitals were destroyed in raids by the Syrian government and Russia. Apollo 13's going on 50. Up next, the anniversary of a disastrous miracle.
And search and recovery forces are working to extract the crew from the capsule.
A 3-person crew from the International Space Station returned to Earth today, a very different planet than the one they left more than 200 days ago. The 2 Americans and 1 Russian were met by a team wearing masks and gloves, the precautions during this pandemic. 50 years ago today, the world was gripped by another group of astronauts returning to Earth. NASA's Apollo 13 mission to the moon had taken a dangerous turn, an explosion in space. The journey turned into a fight for survival. And with the help of Canadians and Americans back on the ground, it was eventually labeled a successful failure. Mike Armstrong explains.
We have commit and we have liftoff at 2:13.
What no one knew when Apollo 13 lifted off the launch pad is that one of its liquid oxygen tanks was damaged. It was like a bomb waiting to go off.
We're go flight. Looks good here.
I had gotten letters before the flight about the number 13 being unlucky. I was not superstitious, didn't think much of it, but I probably should have.
Okay.
Now, the mission was almost flawless for 2 days. The crew had just done this TV broadcast. There was just one more thing to do for the day.
Stand by.
Mix the oxygen tanks. With that explosion, the mission changed from the moon to survival.
Hey, Houston, we've had a problem here.
We knew we were in deep trouble. We didn't know how deep the trouble was.
The late report says the spacecraft now is operating on battery power alone.
With the world watching, NASA scrambled, reworking everything. The astronauts' life support was running out, and ground control had to figure out a way to bring them back. One of the maneuvers was to recalculate this swing around the moon using thrust from what was supposed to be the engine used to land. Now, there was a Canadian contribution. A team at the University of Toronto was asked to figure out the pressure it would take to separate the lunar and crew modules just before re-entry. 3 members of the group were honored for the 40th anniversary and remembered their deadline. They were given just 4 hours.
We'd never had time really to be to thinking, well, what if we gave them the wrong advice and it had failed?
Okay, we read you, Jack.
It was one of those moments where the world stopped in solidarity. Even the Soviet Union had offered help. In the end, it was almost a perfect landing.
The legacy of Apollo 13 is with taking a positive attitude, as the crew did and people at Mission Control, turned an almost certain catastrophe into a successful recovery.
James Lovell, John Swigert, and Fred Hayes.
None of the 3 astronauts ever had another moon mission, but none of them ever considered Apollo 13 anything but a success. Mike Armstrong, Global News.
And that is Global National for this Friday. I'm Robin Gill. This year also marks the 50th anniversary of some of the world's first Pride parades. Those celebrations may be canceled. So tonight, we leave you with Canadians showing their pride at home. In these isolated times, mental health takes a toll. So the hashtag Pride at Home is helping the community connect. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you back here tomorrow. Good night.